How I Scrapped Myself, Part 2. So I went to another factory near my home that made gantry cranes. They didn't pay attention to my diploma and welding certificate. They told me to weld 2 pieces in a vertical position. I was going to adjust the current, but they wouldn't let me. I said that it could not be welded with such a strong current, and then the foreman showed me how it could be welded. I said that I was forbidden to weld a bearing weld with constant tears on the course, but he said that it would do. After Norway, it was horrible to look at the nightmarish working conditions of the closet, a hovel in which people took food, no safety equipment. And the worst thing was the necessity to imitate violent activity when there was nothing to do. You did the job, go to the toilet, have a smoke, sweep part of the shop, shift the scraps from place to place, but do not sit. The boss does not like it very much. I was given something to weld very rarely, and that, as a rule, after working with a turbine, when my hands were shaking. They said that I would become a welder receiving piece wages after 3 years of diligent work on the backstop. I received a small salary of about 300 lats a month, and then I sawed my knee a bit when I was working on a turbine. I went on sick leave for 2 weeks, and then I realized that if I went on blue, state sick leave, I would get about 1,000 a month. And then I remembered that I had not only cut my knee, but also torn my back, and I went on sick leave for 4 months, during which I attended courses before the citizenship test, which I soon passed successfully. And for a couple more months I was on sick leave, waiting for a new passport, and then immediately flew to my sister in Ireland, where I lived for 2 months. I did not find a job. I just did not know how and where to look for it there. My sister, in this regard, to help me flatly refused. Having owed her money for accommodation and a plane ticket, I flew to Norway to my uncle, who was transferred from the capital to work in a backwater, to paint the house for his boss for a small reward. Then I was taken to harvest potatoes. I had to help my kind relative in my free time to clean up the garbage, to make firewood, and to do different jobs around the house. Nevertheless, in a couple of months I earned 2,000 euros in hand. With this money I lived all winter in Latvia, and in spring I went again around the Baltic Sea on a bicycle, but this time without money. I lived by collecting containers on the side of the road, handing them in special machines in supermarkets, and I had enough for food and gas too. Traveling without money was exciting, and it was a very long trip, but it was over. I found myself back in Norway at my uncle's house and got right to work. I worked for a couple months scavenging, then sorting potatoes, then painting rooms inside, and finally got a full-time job as a carpenter's helper. I helped a lonely farmer to cut, or rather saw a hut. But in the spring this farmer retired, and I had to start painting houses from the outside, and I did it until the fall, when it became problematic to paint something because of the constant rains and night fogs. And I had to drop out of the Norwegian language courses I was taking with refugees from Africa and the Middle East. And I rode my bike to England. I had to pay a lot more for the ferry, and the trip itself took more money than I had expected. There I was going to my former roommate, whom I promised to pay for help with money from my first paycheck. She took the money, took almost all my savings, and then demanded a lot of small services from me in addition, and I had to fulfill all her demands. She had no information about a job, nor about rented accommodation, so I had to dig for that information myself. But in the end, I slipped away from her like a colobok and found both a job and cheap accommodation. I worked in a food factory making frozen vegetarian meals, and everything would have been fine, but the people I worked with and the roommates in the apartment where I rented a room were making my life miserable. I was working hard, saving money, saving up for a bicycle. The thing is that the bicycle was stolen from me in the house of my former roommate. However, fall and winter passed, spring came, and the factory closed. I had to go to work at another factory. And then I received a message from Latvia that my first ex-wife had been in a psychiatric hospital for a long time, and the only son is in a crisis center, and everything became meaningless. Both the job at another factory for a lot of money and the social apartment, and the low-wage allowance. I gave up all this and went to Latvia to see my son, whom I had not seen for 10 years, because due to his mother's illness, I could not see him. When I arrived in Latvia with a certain amount of savings, the first thing I did was to buy a bicycle, go to my son, and start giving him presents. The money quickly ran out and I had to go to work. I do not know why the hell I listened to one not very reasonable woman and went to work in a supermarket near my house as a loader. And there the manager began to destroy me just physically. Every day she increased the volume of goods in my department. I'd also worked as a hall worker. The assortment also increased, which created many difficulties for me. I was deprived of weekends for the second week, and my working day was increased to 14 hours. After working like this for a month and a half, I just one morning I could not get to work, turned to the doctor, and went on sick leave. I had to get out of this head of my salary and sick leave through a lawyer, and for a year I was on sick leave, and then received the third group of disability on the diagnosis of polyneuropathy. When assigning the disability group, I was given a booklet of the State Social Integration Agency. This organization helped disabled people to get a new profession in order to somehow socially integrate. The organization was located in Chermala. The first time I came there for 2 weeks, during which I spent the whole day with other disabled people passing various tests, checking my abilities, my limitations, my level of education. And in the finals, I was offered to start training in certain specialties. I couldn't get higher education there because I was given a disability for only 1 year, and I needed 3 years to get higher education, so my disability wouldn't be extended. Besides, I was told that I did not know Latvian at a high level and my age was not young. In general, with higher education was a bummer, but I did not even hope. I had to pay alimony, and the pension was only 70 euros. Scholarship there paid only 40 euros, and that in the absence of negative grades. Of course, there was still very hearty and delicious food 3 times a day, and living in a luxury dormitory on the beach, and all this was absolutely free. They also took me sometimes to the gym and swimming pool with a Greek bath. I was offered courses for seamstresses, confectioners, assistant cooks, typists, and laundry workers. I chose the last one, although I would have been better off as a printer. The course lasted only 9 months, so there was no scholarship. The group was very interesting, and I felt very comfortable in it. The training was fine, except that the roommates in the dormitory were not very good. At first, it was a deaf, very talkative man with a criminal bias. He often got drunk and behaved very badly when drunk. Then, instead of him, I got an elderly schizophrenic who also constantly imposed his communication on me. And finally, they put in the third, my classmate, a young mentally retarded little orphan, to bring him up and do homework with him. I finished these courses with honors, and immediately after receiving my diploma, I was sent to work in the largest laundry in the Baltic states. Even before I started learning a new profession, the doctor picked up a good drug that worked very well for me. I was alert and active, optimistic, perhaps even too optimistic. In fact, the drug played a cruel joke on me. The conditions in this laundry were terrible. For 400 euros per hand, they squeezed all the strength out of people. 3 days of 12 hours work, then 3 days off. But 12 hours you had to work almost without rest in a frenzied rhythm. Once in 2 hours, we were allowed to go to the toilet and smoking room for 10 minutes. One lunch break was half an hour, the second 15 minutes. But the worst thing about this place were some representatives of the team. Some just skipped and shirked from work. Some shirked from work and yelled at others for hours. But this atmosphere of constant bickering and scandal did not depress me in the least. I did not notice it all. Nevertheless, when I was examined before the extension of my disability, I found out that my disease, after starting to work in the laundry, began to progress rapidly. My legs and arms began to ache again, which had been almost non-existent during my training. And the longer I worked there, the worse I became morally. And then I got back problems with my spine, teeth, and several other chronic diseases began to bother me. I was often called in on my days off, and then I worked on my own personal schedule. Before I knew it, I had become an alcoholic. I started drinking regularly, taking alcohol like a medicine, without getting too drunk. If I didn't drink, I would get really sick and lose my ability to work. I eventually quit after 2.5 years on the job. All 9 months of my benefits, I was lying in the country or at home in a terrible depression. From one new drug, I gained 30 kilograms of excess weight. I was in hospital twice for a month each, but nothing helped me, and with alcohol, I could not stop on my own. I returned to the laundry and worked there for 9 more months, which ended with a nervous breakdown and a month in the hospital, followed by 3 more months of sick leave. And after that, I was able to get unemployment benefit. And then I finally got a second disability group and a pension of 200 euros. Then it was raised twice. I never thought of working, even after the unemployment benefit ran out. Money became scarce, and I stopped drinking and smoking. It was easier to part with alcohol than with my pipe and strong-smelling tobacco. And I had to eat a lot of candy, which I had hated since childhood. Then I lay for a very long time and stared stupidly at the laptop screen. The medications changed, but they had no effect. I forced myself to go on living, even though I didn't really want to. But fate took pity on me, and I was offered to take part in a trial of a new drug, which eventually brought me back to life. Over time, I did the operation, which was paid for by the state, went on a diet, going to a nutritionist for free. And now I have already lost 20 pounds. I exercise on a bicycle, walk and wait until I have a magnetic resonance of my spine to start treating it. And now, next to me sits my son, who recently turned 18, and he is a second-year student at the Riga State Technical College, studying to be a computer technician. He is studying remotely now and spends too little time studying. But from morning till evening, he sits in not very exciting video games. And he is too lazy to take and correct a double to get not 10 euros of scholarship, but 50 at least. I have repeated to him many times that if he finishes the technical school well, he can be employed in the state structure in his specialty, that he can get a decent job for an adequate salary if at least he finishes this technical school. But he does not worry at all about the fact that he can be expelled for failure to pass. He naively believes that it is possible to live normally, working as a loader in a supermarket or working at the colander in the laundry. And I spent several hours in a row, every day colorfully, in minute detail, described to him the charms of working life. I described to him and those women with whom I had to communicate, because sane women do not want to live with a locksmith in a rented apartment with partial amenities. One of them he knows very well, she is his mother, and he agrees with me that it is better not to live with her. But he still does not understand that if he misses the opportunity to get an education now, then later he may not get a second chance from life. It's not that it's impossible to go back to school at 30 or even 40. The point is that after a couple of years of working as a loader, you can start drinking regularly, and you don't want to study or live normally or socialize with educated and adequate people. You can just decide that it's okay and just live a life that's been thrown on the scrap heap. I spend my whole life wondering why the hell I gave up on education at 15 when I finished 9th grade and went to this school. First of all, I saw that a lot of people with higher education went to sell underwear in the underpasses, and welders, for example, stayed in business, and one of them even lent money to my parents so that we would not be evicted for debt from the apartment. I'd also realized that if I wanted to study at a university, and for free, I would have to learn Latvian, and my father constantly stigmatized everyone who tried to integrate into Latvian society. He tried to pass off his laziness and stupidity as integrity, and I believed it, despite my dislike and lack of respect for him. And not only my father, many of his friends said the same thing, and I listened to them and was afraid to disagree. Finally, all my relatives and acquaintances had been telling me since childhood that it was good to be a worker, and that everyone else was just a freeloader. My parents had no money to buy normal literature, so I read what was thrown out of libraries in the 91st. We had a lot of books at home, of course, but they were bearded Russian gentry, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Turgenev, and the like. I even read Chernyshevsky, but none of it moved me in the slightest. But Nikolai Ostrovsky was more or less alive compared to the same Nekrasov. And all that horrible literature about August Tellman and Bela Kun and the Bolshevik underground constantly indoctrinated me that the working class was perfection itself, which is why I wanted to become a hegemon. Finally, I realized that even if I managed to master the state language, I would have to live a miserable existence for 4 more years on my parents' neck while I finished this university. This prospect just frightened me. I did not want to wear other people's clothes and eat chicken feet, to live on the verge of eviction from the apartment because of debts for utilities. And the worst thing was that a lot of people, even with specialties, were completely unclaimed on the labor market. And I had no specialty, and how much I did not beat the thresholds of personnel departments of closing factories. When I was looking for practice while studying at my craft school, everywhere I was told that they and professionals with experience do not need, and nothing boys can do even more. Yes, it was a scary time, a time of change, but life is life to constantly change. And nothing justifies the fact that I took and flushed my life down the toilet, into the social cloaca. And I am not very good at explaining to my son now why you can't put a cross on yourself at the beginning of life.